I can never possibly imagine how any woman does what they do is beyond comprehension, but we're both absolutely thrilled.
Angela Levin just dropped a bombshell about Archie and Lilibet, and Harry completely lost it. The royal family is in chaos, and the tension is at breaking point. Something big is coming, and nobody is prepared for it. What exactly did she reveal about Archie and Lilibet, and what happens next for Harry? Join us as we break down the royal bombshell. Angela Levin routine broadcast. The morning started the way most mornings do in a television studio, quietly, with the kind of controlled calm that comes from years of routine, where everything runs on schedule, the lighting is set, the seats are arranged, and the conversation is expected to follow a familiar and predictable path. Nothing about the opening suggested that anything unusual was coming, and that is perhaps what made what followed so striking, because the most significant moments rarely announce themselves in advance. They arrive dressed as ordinary ones, and this morning was no different. Angela Levin walked in without fanfare, taking her seat the way someone does when they have done this many times before, composed and unhurried, carrying the quiet confidence of a person who understands exactly what she knows and exactly why it matters. She is not a commentator who reaches for drama. Her reputation was built on something more careful than that, on measured observation and deliberate delivery, on saying things plainly and letting the weight of them land on their own. And from the moment she settled into the conversation, something in the room shifted, not dramatically, not in any way that could be easily pointed to, but noticeably, the way attention sharpens when someone walks in who has something real to say. The topic moved toward the royal family, as it often does when Levin is in the room, and the tone remained calm on the surface, but underneath it something was building. A quiet pressure that comes when a conversation is moving toward a question that has been left unanswered for too long. Nobody reached for the word bombshell, not yet. But the air in that studio had already changed, and everyone in it could feel it. Levin's credibility and access. Not everyone who speaks about the royal family deserves the same level of attention, and that distinction matters enormously, because the space around the monarchy attracts a wide range of voices, some informed, some speculative, and some simply chasing the noise that surrounds a famous name. So when Angela Levin speaks, the first question worth asking is why her voice carries more weight than most. The answer begins with time, because Levin did not arrive at her understanding of Prince Harry through observation from a distance. She built it through direct and sustained access, the kind that very few journalists or biographers ever achieve when it comes to a working member of the royal family. And the book that came out of that access was not a rushed or surface-level portrait. It was a detailed and carefully constructed account of a man she had spent significant time with, watching, listening, and recording. That history gave her something that most royal commentators simply do not have, which was a baseline, a point of comparison, a sense of who Harry was before the headlines became what they are today. And that baseline is what makes her observations about the direction things have taken so difficult to dismiss, because she is not working from guesswork or secondhand accounts. She is working from memory and experience. Her reputation within royal reporting circles had also been shaped by something specific, which was a pattern of identifying internal tensions early, of pointing to fault lines inside the institution before they became visible to the wider public, and being proven right often enough that the people who initially pushed back on her assessments eventually found themselves catching up to where she had already been. This is the foundation from which her commentary on Archie and Lilibet was delivered, not as speculation dressed up in confident language, but as an informed observation from someone with a long and documented history of understanding how this family operates when the cameras are not pointed directly at it. When Levin raises a question, it does not land the same way as a rumor. It lands as something closer to a signal, and the signal she was sending on this particular morning was one that the people paying close attention could not afford to ignore. The question itself was still forming, but the ground beneath it was already solid. The initial inquiry. Every institution has a set of practices it returns to again and again, not because those practices are exciting or dramatic, but because they create a record, a clear and verifiable trail that confirms what happened, when it happened, and who was present when it did. And inside the British monarchy, few things are treated with more care and more deliberate structure than the arrival of a new royal child. The process that surrounds a royal birth is not accidental. it has been shaped over generations into something precise and transparent, beginning with a formal announcement that follows a specific format, moving through medical verification carried out by recognized professionals, and ending with documentation that enters the official record in a way that is open, traceable, and beyond reasonable dispute. And the reason all of this exists is not tradition for its own sake, but legitimacy, because the line of succession depends entirely on clarity, and clarity depends entirely on process. Levin brought this framework into the conversation carefully, laying it out not as a criticism but as a context, because without understanding what the standard looks like, it is impossible to notice when something deviates from it, and deviation, even when it is minor, carries meaning inside a system that is built on consistency. The focus shifted to Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, and what Levin was pointing to was not a single dramatic departure from protocol, but a series of smaller differences in the way things had been handled compared to what the established process would normally produce. Differences in timing, in the nature of the announcements, in the level of institutional transparency that accompanied each arrival. She was not making an accusation, and her tone made that clear. She was asking a question, and the question was a simple one, which was why the procedures surrounding these two children had looked different from what the institution's own long-standing practices would typically require, and why that difference had never been clearly or formally explained. It is the kind of question that sounds straightforward until you sit with it for a moment, because the longer it goes unanswered, the more weight it accumulates, and the more weight it accumulates, the harder it becomes to treat it as something minor or incidental. The question had been asked plainly and without malice. But plainness does not make a question less uncomfortable, and this one was sitting in the room now, fully formed and impossible to set aside. The system had expectations, and the system had not received what it expected, and that gap was about to become very difficult to explain away. Institutional expectations. There is a reason the British monarchy has lasted as long as it has, and that reason is not charm or popularity, though it has had both at different points in its history. The deeper reason is structure, a set of rules and processes that exist independently of the people who move through them, rules that do not bend easily and that are not designed to accommodate personal preference. Because the moment an institution of this kind begins making exceptions based on individual comfort, it starts to lose the thing that makes it function, which is the confidence of the people who depend on it to be consistent. Lineage and succession are the twin pillars that everything else rests on inside the monarchy, and both of them require something very specific, which is documentation that is clear, verified, and publicly accessible, in a way that leaves no room for reasonable doubt. Because the identity of the people who stand in line to the throne is not a private matter, it is a constitutional one, and constitutional matters belong to the record, not to the individual. This is why the processes surrounding royal births, titles, and formal recognition exist in the form they do. They are not ceremonies invented to celebrate. They are systems designed to confirm, to create an official and unambiguous account of who someone is and what their place within the institution actually is. And that account needs to be produced through recognized channels and verified by recognized authorities, because anything short of that leaves a gap, and gaps inside a system built on legitimacy are dangerous things. What Levin was drawing attention to was the existence of exactly that kind of gap, not a gap that anyone had openly created or deliberately engineered, but one that had formed through a series of decisions that prioritized personal privacy over institutional transparency. And the problem with that kind of gap is that it does not stay quiet. It attracts questions, and questions that go unanswered inside a system that is supposed to be built on clarity tend to grow rather than shrink. The monarchy is not a private family, even when the people within it wish it were. It is a public institution carrying public responsibilities, and the documentation surrounding the children of a man who still carries a royal title and whose children carry royal names is not something that sits comfortably outside the reach of institutional expectation. The rules existed for a reason, and the reason was trust. And trust was precisely what was now being tested. Something had been left undefined, and undefined things have a way of demanding definition eventually. Privacy against public role. The tension at the heart of Harry and Meghan's position within the royal world is not a new one. It has been visible and discussed and debated since long before the formal separation from royal duties took place. But the reason it keeps returning to the surface is that it has never been fully resolved, and unresolved tensions inside a system as structured and as public as the monarchy do not simply fade with time. They find new expressions, new flashpoints, new moments where the contradiction becomes impossible to look past. The position Harry and Meghan had carved out for themselves was a genuinely unusual one, because they had stepped back from the formal obligations of working royal life, from the engagements, the ceremonial duties, the constant visibility that comes with being an active member of the institution, and they had done so publicly and deliberately, citing the need for privacy, for space, for the ability to raise their children outside the relentless scrutiny that royal life produces. That desire is understandable on a human level, and very few people who observed the pressure they were under during their time as working royals would argue that the scrutiny was anything other than intense and frequently brutal. So the impulse to step away from it makes complete sense when viewed through a personal lens. But the institution does not operate through a personal lens. It operates through a structural one. And through that lens, the position Harry and Meghan occupy creates a problem that has no entirely clean solution. Because they retain their royal titles after stepping back, their children carry names that connect them directly to the House of Windsor, and the public profile they continue to maintain through interviews, projects, and public statements keeps them firmly inside the conversation about the royal family, even as they insist on the right to exist outside its obligations. This is the structural tension that Levin was circling, because the desire for privacy and the retention of a public royal identity are not easily compatible, and when that incompatibility touches something as specific and as institutionally significant as the documentation surrounding royal children, it stops being a philosophical disagreement and becomes a practical one with real consequences. You cannot be private and public in equal measure when the institution you are connected to requires clarity, and the children at the center of this conversation were connected to that institution whether their parents wished it or not. The gap between what was being claimed and what the system required was widening, and the people watching it widen were starting to ask very direct questions. The consistency gap. There is a particular kind of problem that emerges when someone tries to exist in two places at once, not physically, but institutionally, when they want the benefits that come with belonging to a system while also maintaining the distance that comes with having left it. And the problem is that systems are not built to accommodate that kind of in-between position. They are built on consistency, and consistency requires that the rules apply in the same way to everyone they touch. Harry and Meghan had made their position clear in public terms. They had stepped back. They had relocated. They had spoken openly about their reasons for doing so. And much of the world had listened and understood, because the pressures they described were real, and the toll those pressures had taken was visible. But stepping back from duties is not the same as stepping outside the system entirely, and the distinction between those two things is where the consistency gap began to form. On one side of the gap was the partial disengagement, the withdrawal from the daily obligations of royal life, the engagements canceled, the patronages resigned, the physical distance placed between themselves and the institution they had been part of, and all of that was documented in public and broadly accepted as a genuine departure from the working royal model. On the other side of the gap was the continued symbolic connection, because the titles remained, the names remained, the association with the House of Windsor remained, and with it came a continued public identity that drew directly from the institution they had stepped away from, an identity that gave them a platform, an audience, and a level of global attention that would not exist without the royal connection at its foundation. The ambiguity that this created was not just a matter of public perception, it was a structural problem, because the monarchy operates through clearly defined categories. You are inside the system, or you are outside it, you carry its obligations, or you do not. And when someone occupies a position that does not fit neatly into either category, the system does not know how to process them, and that uncertainty ripples outward into every question that touches on their identity and their place within the institution. For the children, this ambiguity carried additional weight. Because Archie and Lilibet had not made any choices about their position, they had been born into a situation that was already undefined. carrying names that connected them to a system that their parents had partially left, and the question of what that connection meant in practical and institutional terms had never been formally answered. The undefined status was not a minor administrative detail. It was a gap at the center of something that the institution requires to be clear, and gaps of that kind do not stay contained, they expand. They attract scrutiny, and they generate exactly the kind of persistent public uncertainty that was now surrounding these two children and their place within the royal story. Uncertainty had been allowed to settle where clarity was required, and clarity was now being demanded from a direction nobody had anticipated. Public clarification efforts. When a story reaches a certain level of public attention, the people at the center of it eventually feel the pressure to respond, not always because the claims being made are accurate, but because silence in the face of a growing narrative can itself become a kind of confirmation, and the decision about when to speak, what to say, and how to say it is one of the most consequential choices available to anyone navigating a public crisis of this kind. Meghan had been at the center of a specific claim that had been circulating with increasing persistence, a claim that the names of Archie and Lilibet had been trademarked or were in the process of being trademarked for commercial purposes, and the suggestion carried an obvious implication, which was that the children's royal identities were being used, or were being prepared to be used, as part of a broader commercial strategy. And that implication was one that touched on questions of integrity, of the appropriate relationship between royal identity and personal profit, and of what it meant to use a child's name in that way. The response that came was direct, a public statement making clear that no trademarking of the children's names had taken place or was being pursued, and that the privacy and protection of the children remained the central concern, guiding every decision made about their public presence and the way their identities were managed and presented. The statement was clear in its specific terms, and on the narrow question of trademarking, it did provide a definitive answer. But clarity on one specific claim is not the same as clarity on the broader questions that had been accumulating around the children's situation. This is the distinction that matters, because the public was not only asking about trademarks, they were asking about something larger, which was the overall consistency of the approach being taken toward Archie and Lilibet, the decisions made about their documentation, their public presence, their institutional status, and the degree to which those decisions aligned with what the system they were connected to would normally require. Resolving one thread of a complicated story does not resolve the story. It sometimes makes the remaining threads more visible by contrast, because once one question has been answered, the attention that was spread across multiple concerns narrows and focuses on what remains. And what remained after the clarification around trademarking was a set of deeper questions that the statement had not touched. The effort to clarify had been genuine, and the specific claim it addressed had been dealt with directly. But the people following the situation closely understood that the clarification had operated on the surface of something that went much deeper, and that the questions sitting beneath that surface were still there, still unanswered, still generating the kind of sustained public attention that does not dissipate simply because one part of the picture has been made clearer. One answer had been given, but the question underneath it was still wide open, and the reaction it was producing inside Harry's circle was about to become very difficult to contain. Reaction dynamics. The moment a public figure's inner circle moves from a state of monitoring to a state of active response, something important has changed, because that shift does not happen casually or without reason. It happens when the people closest to the situation have made a collective assessment that the story has reached a point where staying still is more dangerous than moving, and the movement that was now being reported around Harry suggested that exactly that assessment had been made. Sources familiar with the situation described something that sounded less like a measured communications review and more like a rapid mobilization, a sudden urgency in the conversations happening around Harry that reflected the pace at which the public narrative was moving, and the recognition that the distance between that narrative and the official position was growing in a direction that needed to be addressed quickly. Consultations were happening fast, which is itself a signal, because the natural rhythm of royal-adjacent crisis management tends toward caution and deliberation, toward the slow, careful building of a response that has been examined from every angle before it is released into the public domain. And when that rhythm accelerates, It usually means that the situation has developed faster than the people managing it anticipated, and that the tools they had prepared for a slower-moving problem are no longer adequate for the one they are actually facing. What was driving the urgency was not a single claim or a single broadcast. It was the cumulative effect of everything that had been building: the questions about protocol, the gaps in institutional clarity, the absence of formal documentation that could settle what was being asked, and the growing sense among those watching that the lack of a clear and comprehensive response was itself becoming part of the story. Because in the absence of clarity, the public fills the space with its own conclusions, and the conclusions being drawn were not ones that served Harry's interests or his family's. The behavioral response patterns that were emerging were being watched as closely as the substance of anything being said, because how someone responds to pressure of this kind tells its own story, independent of the specific content of the response. And what observers were noting was a combination of visible urgency and a lack of the kind of calm, organized messaging that tends to accompany a situation that is genuinely under control. Harry himself had not spoken publicly on the specific questions being raised, and the silence from him personally was sitting in contrast to the activity being reported around him, creating a picture of a man whose team was working hard while he himself had not yet found the ground from which to respond directly. And that picture was generating its own set of interpretations among the people who had been following every development closely. The reaction was visible, but the response was not yet formed. And in that gap between visible reaction and coherent response, something else was being noticed. Something that was not coming from Harry's side at all. The significance of silence. Silence is rarely just silence when it comes from someone who has shown, on many occasions, that they are more than willing to speak. And Meghan Markle had demonstrated throughout her public life that she understood how to use her voice, when to deploy it, how to frame a message, and what kind of platform to use for maximum effect. Which is exactly why her absence from this particular moment was being examined so carefully by the people watching the situation unfold. The questions surrounding Archie and Lilibet had been building for long enough that a response from both Harry and Meghan might reasonably have been expected, and Harry's team had shown clear signs of urgency, suggesting that the situation was being taken seriously, so the fact that Meghan had not added her voice to whatever response was being shaped was something that observers could not easily set aside. Two broad interpretations were circulating among those following the story closely, and they pointed in very different directions, because the first reading of her silence was strategic. The idea that someone with Meghan's communication instincts had made a deliberate calculation that stepping back from this particular moment was the smarter move, that allowing Harry to be the face of the response kept the focus narrower and reduced the risk of the story expanding further in directions that would be harder to manage. The second reading was more significant in its implications, because it suggested that the silence was not a shared strategy, but a reflection of a genuine divergence in approach, that Harry and Meghan were not responding as a unified front, because they had not arrived at a unified position, and that the absence of Meghan's voice was less about tactics and more about a difference in how each of them was processing what was happening and what needed to be done about it. What made this second reading difficult to dismiss was the contrast it created, because Harry's circle was visibly active while Meghan remained publicly quiet, and that visible asymmetry between two people who had always presented themselves as a team was itself a kind of statement, even if it was not intended as one. Silence inside a story this public does not go unnoticed. It gets interpreted, and the interpretations that were forming around Meghan's absence were adding a new and unexpected dimension to an already complicated situation, one that raised questions not just about strategy, but about the solidity of the united front. The two of them had always projected. The silence was saying something, and the question of what it meant was now sitting at the very center of everything. Open questions. There is a particular kind of unresolved situation that is more unsettling than one that has reached a clear and definitive conclusion, even a painful one, because a painful conclusion at least gives people something solid to stand on, something they can process and eventually move past. But an unresolved situation keeps everything suspended, keeps the questions alive, keeps the tension present, and offers no clear point at which anyone involved can reasonably say that it is over. That is precisely where this story had arrived. Not at an ending, but at a kind of open space where the most important questions were still standing without answers. And the absence of those answers was itself the most significant thing about the moment. The question of protocol consistency had never been formally addressed, and that matters because protocol inside the monarchy is not decoration, it is the mechanism through which legitimacy is established and maintained. And when the application of that protocol appears uneven, when the processes that exist to create clarity seem to have been followed in some cases and departed from in others without explanation, the institution cannot simply expect the public to look past it, because the public understands, even without being told explicitly, that consistency is the foundation on which trust is built. The balance between privacy and public responsibility had also remained unresolved, and this tension sits at the heart of everything surrounding Harry and Meghan's position, because the argument for privacy is real and legitimate, and deserving of respect. But it exists in direct conflict with the institutional requirements attached to royal identity. And that conflict cannot be resolved by simply asserting one side of it more loudly than the other. It requires a structural answer that nobody had yet been willing or able to provide. The long-term implications for Archie and Lilibet were perhaps the most difficult threat of all, because they are children who did not choose any part of the situation they were born into, who carry names and associations that connect them to one of the most scrutinized institutions in the world, and whose identity within that institution remains formally undefined in ways that will eventually require resolution. Not for the sake of the public conversation, but for their own sake, because children deserve clarity about who they are and where they stand. What Angela Levin had introduced into the conversation was not a scandal in the traditional sense. It was something quieter and in some ways more persistent, which was a set of legitimate questions that had been allowed to remain unanswered for long enough that the absence of answers had itself become the story. The questions were still there, still open, still waiting, and waiting has a way of making things louder over time. Drop your thoughts in the comments section below, like this video, and subscribe for more incredible stories just like this one.